Hey everyone, this is my book review of the book All About Love by Bell Hooks. So overall, I thought this book was pretty useful, pretty helpful. Although I don't think cuz I got it recommended in very high regard by somebody I know, and I don't know if it's like that level. I think it's very helpful, but there's a lot of nuances and things, and also it goes pretty deep, and it does a good job of trying to simplify, but I think it's an inherently complicated task of trying to break down why love in modern society has been so broken for so long, and it has to do with a lot of structural things which they talk about, some of which I don't completely agree. I agree with the fact that some of them exist, but I don't agree with the extent that they kind of talk about. But I think the overall just message about love and relationships, I personally kind of believe, partly from this, partly from other stuff, is it really depends on the person. So you can read this book, and if you find somebody else who reads this book as well and really believes in this kind of approach to stuff, then you guys will probably have a higher chance of being a good match, right? But let's say you read this book, you adhere to a lot of the stuff it says, and then somebody else has never read that before, and they don't know to adhere by that stuff. Then unless you guys communicate well, it's going to be much more difficult to be on the same terms, because you guys have different expectations for things. And this is inherently due to the fact that everybody has different childhood experiences, life experiences that shape their view of everything in different ways, but those include love, right? And so this is why, in my opinion, right, you have to have very good communication and for a relationship to work, because each person is uniquely different. Each person has gone through a different set of experiences. Maybe if they even go through the same set of experiences, they've perceived and kind of have different takeaways from it, and those experiences have impacted them in different ways. And so as such, there's a huge gap between, in a lot of things, not everything, but there's a huge gap between us and everybody else in this world. And so if you want to be in a long-term relationship with somebody and you want to love that person, you need to close that gap. You cannot have you cannot have a loving relationship where you're at such a distance from this person. You don't know anything about them, or you only know part of them, or they put on a facade for you and you put on a facade for them, right? That's not a real lasting relationship. So ultimately, I feel it depends, right? Because you can have somebody, you can have a guy who's a playboy, right? And if you try to go in with this kind of stuff, right, it's not really going to work. But at the same time, you can have the opposite situation where it is going to work. So there's just a lot of variation with who you kind of meet and who you talk to. And this is why it's important to just, meet different people and keep open mind. But I also think that, there is a danger with this idea of falling in love as being completely helpless to this pure desire with no sort of rational wait, let me think about this kind of aspect, because I think that's potentially how a lot of problematic relationships can occur, or at least be initiated, is through this idea that falling in love is all about chasing some sort of desire, which I don't think is really the truth. I think it's more about chasing a connection. That might be a better way to put it. Not necessarily a specific feeling, because over time all feelings change, right? I may be happy today, I may be sad tomorrow, maybe upset the next day, and that's a normal variation in my feelings, and that's going to be reflected in human relationships too. So you can't delusionally portray this idea of love as being something that's only positive, beneficial, doesn't require effort. It's just another situation where we're seeing delusional thinking, just with sometimes with economic bubbles, I've talked about before, right? Everybody puts their hopes and dreams of buying a new house, and then they put it onto this specific stock, or Nvidia or something like that, right? It's the same thing. Now you put your hopes and dreams on a person, and I think it's dangerous, because it's not really fair to that person to hold such weight. Especially if you're not going to choose to communicate with them. You're going to keep them at a distance, and you're going to put on a false front, so they're not even going to know the real you. And yeah, so I think the biggest thing about this is I think you really need to be authentic in who you are. And I know a lot of people say that, but you have to understand that by doing that, you may not, let's say, get much like attention from certain kinds of people that you may want to get attention from, right? You may like certain people, but by being yourself, you kind of drive them away, right? And I think that is the hard reality of like, you know, it's better to be yourself and maybe, not have like the girl or guy of your dreams, but attract the right kind of person who at least likes you for the correct person you are, than to put on a false front and be with somebody else. But because like nobody can put on a false front forever. And so that's why it starts a time bomb. The time bomb just starts counting down. It's like you put on this false front. It's like, okay, how long can you last? Because once you can't last anymore, even if maybe the other person's doing the same thing too, once you guys can't last and you show the true colors, you're going to have a mismatch in expectations. If you don't have good communications, it's going to be a problem, right? And so you cause all these problems by like faking from the beginning. Whereas if you just kind of are more true to yourself in a certain way, right? You don't need to fake it, and therefore you're not going to really change because that's kind of who you are. Of course, you can change in minor ways, but I'm saying the major aspects of your personality will most likely not change, and who you are, right? And the things you probably value. So that, yeah, like that will just be conducive to creating, a more stable long-term relationship, which I think is kind of what I hope most people want. Anyway, let's get into the notes that I kind of wrote down. Okay, so just because we invest our emotions and feelings into someone and feel connected or drawn to them deep down, this doesn't mean that we love them. Love is a choice and an intention combined with action. It is a process of nurturing someone else for their own good. So I think it is useful to think of a parent and child love, where the parent loves the child so much that they'll do things that the child doesn't want, that the parent knows are good for the child in the long term. Additionally, the parent will make personal sacrifices for the child as well. I think it's important to like think about this because it's like, usually we're like, oh, if you love somebody, right, like you'll do what they want, right, kind of thing, right? Or you'll help them with whatever they want, But I think there is an extent where like you need to have some pushback. And it's actually much easier, to be honest, if somebody is like kind of delusional and like kind of, wants this thing. It's easier to just kind of like listen to them and just like agree. And that's like what a lot of friends do, right? A lot of friends are just kind of agreeing machines. They just say yes, 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 yes. And they never really create conflict. And as such, it can be problematic, And so true love is actually kind of creating conflict, at least not shying away from conflict, because you know that this conflict will ultimately result in a better kind of person, Obviously there needs to be balance, but I'm just saying you can't always, avoid conflict, because that won't be good for the person long term. Okay, so personally, I think as a society, we should focus on familial love, because if you think about it, for a lot of people, romantic love ends up becoming familial love, whether couples expect it or not. I think this mismatch in expectations, where people keep expecting romantic love when the time has changed more towards familial love, in the end, this causes issues. Of course, you will have both, but I think the overfocus on romantic love in our society causes long-term problems for anyone who wants to get married or stay with an individual for an extended period of time. Because if you think about it, family is very long-term, very stable, very, in a sense, kind of accepting but realistic about who a person is, and they understand the trueness of somebody's nature, right? Whereas romantic love is often, like, you can have both. It's just it takes a little bit more skill to, weave both together. But for the most people who are unskilled, they view it as like a binary choice. And there are very clear distinctions when you make it as a binary choice, but it doesn't mean that they're mutually exclusive. In fact, they're very like complementary. It's just that we don't think of them as complementary, and that we only focus on romantic love. And so when familial love shows up, all of a sudden we're confused as like what this is, and this is not what I signed up for, et cetera, right? And so romantic love is really the like more like falling in love feeling. And this is typically why that tends to be shorter, because like I said, our feelings change over time, and there's going to be good days, bad days. And that romantic love, can wax and wane. Hopefully it doesn't, disappear completely, but it may not be at its highest all the time, which is fine. It's okay. It's just like how capitalism thinks we always have to be happy. No, we don't always have to be happy, but like we shouldn't always be depressed either. It's just got to need a balance, Okay, care and affirmation are the foundations of love, and they cannot coexist within abuse and neglect. The lack of love and struggle with love in our society arises out of our childhood experiences with love from our family because this is where we are taught. Unfortunately, most kids are taught by parents who don't know anything about love and as a result enter the world with this skewed viewpoint. Okay, so now we're going to get into some parts I don't like about the book, or I don't think it's that great. So I think this book is useful, but very hard to generalize in some parts, okay? So one part is saying that all men lie more than women, and I don't think this is a generalization you can make across the entire gender, nor do I think it's necessarily useful. I think this is similar to kind of like a stereotype, something that like a lot of people believe is true, but okay, a lot of people believe it's true and is true in certain cases, but to generalize and say that it's true in all cases is incorrect and potentially harmful. And the reality is that there's so much nuance that each person acts very different. You can have a guy who is a pathological liar, right? You can have a woman who's a pathological liar. You can have a guy who acts very masculine. You can have a guy who also acts feminine. You can have a woman who acts masculine. You can also have a woman who acts feminine. So it's like you can have this whole spectrum. And because we're not going to, I mean, I don't know of any like surveys that I've done to show the percent distributions of different kinds of how many men are more masculine, how many more feminine. And the other thing is because people often put on a front. So it's like, are they just being masculine because that's like what society kind of expects, or that's what's safe to put out there, or like they're, you know, they don't want to be seen as maybe like homosexual. So they don't want to be seen as so feminine or something like that. So like there's so much nuance there that I just don't know if this is helpful. I'm like, I would rather you just focus on the person you're talking to and, you know, try to pay attention closer to them and say, okay, do they lie? Do they not lie? You know, regardless of the gender, right? How do they act? What is their behavior like? I feel like that is much more important than saying, oh, because they are a guy, because they are a like girl, because et cetera, they are going to lie. They are going to do this. They could, they also could not. So like you need to have that mental flexibility to really just adapt it to your current situation. Okay, the author claims that men use psychological terrorism on women to better control them. Yeah, I just honestly don't think this statement is that useful because there are definitely situations where the opposite is true and some naive women get taken advantage of by women, right? Yes, some men want control and power, but some women also want control and power. So once again, I don't think there's a meaningful conclusion to be drawn from that. And I don't think it's necessary in, you know, helping her argument. I mean, I know what I'm saying is like, it doesn't seem like, well, Ryan, that's not very helpful, right? Like you're saying that you can't really like generalize from these things. Well, then what am I supposed to do? Well, yeah, but like I'm telling you, if you generalize, then like what's going to happen is you're going to go into a relationship with preconceived notions that are not based on the reality of what the other person actually is like. And then eventually you're going to go down that road in the relationship. You're going to have mismatched expectations. And unfortunately, that mismatched expectations is going to be purely your own doing. Like, I think it's like one thing if, let's say, they put on a front and they act one way, right? And then you have mismatched expectations because of that. But if you have societal, like, induced expectations about this person and stereotypes and those kind of things, like, it's going to really seriously affect your relationship. And honestly, it's going to be your kind of problem that you have this. Of course, it's more complicated because then again, the other girl or guy could also have the same expectation where they believe, let's say, men do this, women do that. And that could also blind them to not look at who you actually are and what your preferences actually are, right? I think for the average person, it's very difficult to accept the complexity of life, right? And accept that there's so much nuance, because when you accept that, it means my neat little boxes and my categories that I put everybody into don't work. And that means that I have to do the hard work of actually like listening to this person, actually thinking, actually trying to figure them out, instead of just saying, oh, because they look this way, because they're this, because they're this gender, I can put them in this category, you know? And and I think that's where you can get into a lot of trouble, because you can get kind of lulled into believing someone is one way, which is not even their fault. It's just because you have this like idea in your head. Okay. Moving on. We say we want the truth and to know what our significant other's true thoughts and feelings are, but in reality, we don't want to know, because it will shatter our rosy false perception of them and prevent us from projecting our desires and wants onto their blank slate. Yeah, and like this is something Bell Hooks talks about. It's like, we all say, oh, we want to be loved, we want to have real love, we want to have like a long-term relationship, we want to have true love, all this stuff. But a lot of us are not willing to actually change, not willing to face the issues that come with that kind of stuff. And I mean, this is probably something that's going to exist as long as humans are around, but it's like you're going to see people who go through these cycles of, couple months on off, then switch the person, couple months on off, then like new relationship again and again and again, and maybe it stretches out for, let's say, a year, maybe it stretches out for 2 years, but there's like a hump, there's like a barrier at like a certain time frame when it stretches beyond, let's say, like being the short romantic love that like kind of makes you feel good, feel excited, that kind of thing. And there's just a transition error that some people can just like not make because of the fact that they're kind of holding themselves back. It could also be the other person too, right? There's a lot of situations that can happen. But it's like if you're holding yourself back and you're not willing to expose yourself, right, which of course is a very scary thing. And of course, yeah, it can lead to emotional trauma. And this is why a lot of men and women do not want to open up because, like, I think maybe more men, but again, that could be a generalization. But it's just like because they're afraid of that kind of cost inherently of opening up to somebody else because, well, what if we don't actually, it doesn't work out? Then I open myself up and that's kind of like bad, right? And I feel like exposed and like these kind of things. So, yeah. Okay, moving on. Okay, so some parts of the book I thought were pretty unrealistic. So she talks about like changing society and having the foundation of everything be ethical love. So I just want to point out, right? And I'm not trying to be like a Debbie Downer here, but like if you look at history for the past thousands of years, right, you'll realize that true human nature, what it is, right, and how this has been proven time and time again that we just revert to our human nature and we cannot possibly all be more than that. I agree with her that some people can change, right? Other people cannot change, and that's just a fact. And so believing that you can create a new civilization, a new world based off of ethical love, I like to be an optimist, but I like to be realistic too. And I don't think this is very realistic whatsoever. I think this is about as realistic as believing that we're going to be in an AI utopia where everybody gets free money for not working at all, right? I think that's like about the same level of realisticness, which means I don't think it's realistic. And like, I think that's fine. Like, I think that you just have to really, what this book is saying is like, hey, true love, if you really want it and you're willing to put in the effort and like expose yourself, right? It exists out there and it's the good love that exists, right? You're just going to have to wait. You have to be patient. You can't expect to find it immediately and you need to be vigilant. You need to be open-minded. And these are all things that people struggle with in many aspects of their lives, not even related to love, just everything else they struggle with. You have to face yourself, right? You have to overcome yourself. This is just like impossible for some people. So it's no wonder that there are people out there who just cannot find love because they're like, they have these other personal barriers that are just holding them back from this kind of thing. And again, the hard part about like statistics and like numbers and stuff is like, if you go through, let's say, 5 or 10 relationships, right, and they all fail and it all doesn't work out and you feel like you keep opening yourself up and it doesn't work and then you keep trying and blah, 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 you will be very likely probably to give up hope, right? It depends, of course, on like the extent of those relationships and how, deep they were. But like, because that's a lot of failures, right? You're like, man, this is not working, right? But in reality, if you think about the number of possible people out there that you could possibly meet and the ones that maybe fit your kind of standards and maybe that would be agreeable with you, I guarantee you 10 is just like a drop of water in the ocean, And for that to kind of change your behavior is the most, human behavior thing, the most irrational thing. Because from a numbers perspective, it doesn't mean anything. You're just getting kind of unlucky and it's fine, but pick yourself up and keep going, Like obviously, yeah, if you're getting like a little bit tired from doing this, yeah, take a break and then come back. But it's not like, it doesn't mean that there's some inherent like, maybe problem with you. Like, I mean, there could be, but it also could just be like you're finding the wrong people. Maybe you need to find different people using different techniques and stuff. So like we have a really bad ability to look at like random chance and understand that. And perceive that. And so that's why we have this idea of like, oh, my soulmate, the one and only for me. Well, like, to be honest, I guarantee you probably will have multiple soulmates. So there are probably multiple people who could fit your definition and who you could probably, create a very satisfying life with. So you just got to broaden your eyes to this kind of reality and just be patient. But again, this is all stuff that's very difficult for a lot of people to do anyway. So yeah, I think it's just important to accept the truth and like, so going back to kind of the idea of making this like ethical love utopia thing. I think it's important just to accept the truth, accept the reality as it is. You know, don't try to factor in a future world that doesn't exist yet, because you need to operate in the present, right? So to accept the truth, work within reality instead of waiting for this kind of, you know, I'm gonna be honest, I don't think in the next like 1,000 years this is gonna like happen, right? It's just not gonna happen, right? So don't wait for this insane and unreasonable change that's not gonna come in your lifetime, right? Don't count on it. Okay, so she also emphasizes about how the patriarchy is controlling everything, so it's kind of like male dominant society ideas, right? But I kind of feel like she goes off the deep end, because there are definitely men who like to be led by a woman in a relationship. Again, right? This is like, I don't think you can generalize here. In reality, everything's not black and white, and most people who are pushing forward the patriarchy likely have no idea what they're doing, and they're not all acting mischievously, trying to plot the downfall of the world like she makes them sound. I think she makes it sound like people are very intentional. I think a lot of people just don't even, I'm gonna be honest, I think you ask some people, they don't even know what the word patriarchy means, okay? So like, if you don't even know what the word means, how can you perpetuate those kind of things? Like, I agree, you can, but it's not intentional. You just are existing within the confines of society and just continuing to do what you normally do. And that's kind of being dictated by how society was structured. So in a sense, like, I don't think you should blame people who are not intentionally, you know, like trying to push for the patriarchy, but who are just like living life and accidentally doing it. Like, I don't think we should find that, oh, they are scheming, they are devious men out there trying to do this kind of thing. You know, like, okay, yeah, there's probably some men who have very bad, you know, like view of gender dynamics and stuff. And I agree with that, right? But it's just like, you can't say the world is being controlled by like the patriarchy. Like, I agree that structure of society and precedents are very powerful, and that, yeah, male dominant society is very powerful. But I also believe that there is change. There is a lot of change that's occurring, right? Like, you look right now, there is a lot of change compared to before. And, you know, maybe some people don't think it's enough, but I'm just saying there's a lot of change that's happened. So, yeah, I don't think we need to focus so much on this, you know? Because I feel like there's change that's occurring, right? And like, I don't think people are actively, you know, trying to just like end the world and have like only male dominance all over the place, you know? I think that's like, some people definitely are, but you cannot generalize that to all men, because you make all men seem bad, right? And just like, you know, there's like women who maybe are at the extremes of like the feminist movement who believe, I don't know, some radical thing, right? And like, you can't also portray them as representing all women either. So again, like, this is not becoming a very interesting video or book review, but I'm pretty much just pointing out there's a lot of like nuances here that I do not think you can accurately write with confidence that this is a good generalization. I just don't think you cannot. I don't think you can. Okay, and yeah, like, just further on that, most people act in their own self-interest, right? So men in positions of power will act in self-interest, but I also think women will. But of course, yeah, there are constraints of society that alter those dynamics. Okay, getting into some things I like, right? So I really liked your discussion of power in relationships and how it is often easier to play power games than to actually love, because true love makes you vulnerable. I think the stereotype with this is that guys are really good at this, which I think is like probably kind of true, has a kernel of truth to it. Just because like guys seem to be more effective at just like completely isolating themselves and shutting off their emotions, and then as a result, this can maybe predispose them to favoring more power dynamic type relationships because they feel like they can count on power more than the fleeting, feeling of love. Like, I believe it was Machiavelli said, it's better to be feared than love, because fear you can control, but love you cannot. Okay, so I think the reason why love is so hard is that with all things in life, each person you enter a relationship with has a different idea of love. Okay, we kind of talked about this. Sometimes it's very similar to yours, but sometimes very different. This is why I personally believe, communication is the foundational layer upon which all relationships must rest. Since if you cannot find these differences and either resolve or accept or adapt to them, you'll be doomed because of the gap between your expectations and reality. Okay, I agree with her when she talks about the importance of listening, because I feel like this is something males need to learn how to do more, right? Something that's often overemphasized as a female's kind of job, a woman's job, to listen to the man. But like, no, you need to both listen to each other, because it's like, you guys want to start, speaking like one person speaks Korean, the other person speaks like French to each other. Like, that's not going to work, right? And that's just how a relationship is. If you guys are not listening, right, then you might as well be speaking like a foreign language. And we all know how that goes. I also like her emphasis on choosing love versus falling in love, because falling in love is highly unstable and unrealistic because we simply don't know enough about the situation. But choosing love comes after a period of reflection and knowing what we want. So it's kind of more intentional. Loving and to love others is a skill we must learn and master to have good, strong relationships. And true love is knowing each other at a very deep and intimate level and not withholding parts of yourself from each other. Only through this deep connection and mutual understanding of each other can true love exist. So that's my book review. This book, I would say pretty good. Maybe it shouldn't be this long, but there's I think the latter half I like better than the beginning. I think it highlights a lot of problems, right? And unfortunately, a lot of people are not going to change anything. For most people watching this video, you may not change anything, right? Because it's very hard to change. And it's the same reason why people do not improve in life. It's the same reason why people do not, improve themselves in other aspects of their life, right? It's the same reason why people may not advance in work, right? And it's the same reason why they may not understand love and they may not find love or may not find fulfilling relationships that provide them with the love they want, desire, and can provide others. If you have any other questions, put them down below. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next video.